I'm Glenn Alford. I was Idaho State Sports Information Director for 31 years, from 1967 to 1998. Some of the most memorable basketball games I've seen here involved battles between Jim Killingsworth's Bengals and Judd Heathcote of Montana. I'll tell you about one of those battles in this edition of Storytime. There was nobody that Jim Killer Killingsworth would rather beat than Judd Heathcote. When Idaho State and Killer hooked up with Heathcote and Montana, great basketball resulted. There was never more true than the 1974 playoff game in which the Bengals won their first Big Sky Conference basketball championship. The game itself was a classic. The coming out party for a skinny 6'11" 1/2 inch, 195-pound freshman from nearby Aberdeen. But events leading up to the game made ISU's win, accomplished on the Montana home court, Harry Adams Fieldhouse, where the Grizz had won 14 consecutive games, improbable. Setting the stage, the teams were evenly matched, 19 wins and 7 losses, 11-3 at the end of conference play. Why was the game in Missoula if the records were even? Montana won a coin toss. ISU quickly had to charter an airplane for a Monday flight for a Tuesday playoff game. This was the worst flight ever that didn't involve a plane crash. I've flown in a lot of airplanes, and it was the most awful time I've ever spent in the air. The turbulence was so bad that when I was sitting next to radio play-by-play announcer Larry Eckenrode, I turned to say something to him, and I was looking at Larry's knees. He had unwisely unfastened his seatbelt, and his head ricocheted off the roof of the airplane. They ran out of airsick bags. Reserve forward Ron Kurdoff was in the restroom trying to throw up in the commode, and he missed because the plane was bouncing so hard. I looked out the window, and we were flying over the interstate, and because of headwinds, cars were passing us. It was a nauseated bunch of Bengals that arrived in Missoula. Killer was so disgusted, he canceled the charter flight home, and we made other arrangements. Montana had a fine team and didn't need any gifts from the airline industry. Heathcote coached Montana so successfully that his next gig was Michigan State. You might recall that his Spartans won the NC2A championship Magic Johnson's freshman year. You may also remember his Michigan State assistants, Tom Izzo and Herb Williams, Herb Ball. Heathcote's coaching style had him seemingly on the verge of apoplexy at every moment. He was red-faced and sweating, and a national basketball publication once said that he coached as if he had chugged a bottle of Tabasco sauce. Headlining the Montana players was center Ken McKenzie. He was the only unanimous first-team player in the Big Sky in 1974, and he was the conference scoring and rebounding champion. Killingsworth came to ISU never having coached a team with a losing record. When he left here in 1977, he still hadn't coached a team with a losing record. He was a master tactician of whom it was said he didn't recruit players, he recruited sons. ISU's players were no slouch either. Mr. Clutch, all-league forward Jim Anderson, was a deadly outside shooter and one of the top defensive players in the Big Sky Conference. He led a group that included Icewater Frank Cron from Gooding, powerful 6'8" center Dan Spindler, select guards Kevin Hoyt and George Rodriguez, and a deep bench. You forgot something, Glenn. You mean the freshman, Steve Hayes? He developed into one of the best players in Big Sky history, but he sure arrived here skinny. Killer gave Steve 100-pound sacks of peanuts with orders to eat them all. On bus trips, when the players wanted a break, one of them would tell Killer, "Coach, Steve's hungry." Booster buses brought Bengal fans from Pocatello to Missoula. ISU supporters included Fred Crane and a crew from the watering hole he owned a piece of, the Library Lounge. I must confess to having my own monogram stool at the library. Fred got his start in public address announcing with fast-pitch softball at Pocatello's Rainy Field, but before long he was a rodeo announcer with a national reputation and was a fixture here when the Dodge Circuit Rodeo made it to Pocatello annually. Fred had the gift of gab. Why do I mention Fred? Listen up. Adams Fieldhouse was packed. Every seat was filled with a butt. I had no job at the game and no place to sit, but I knew Montana had turned an enclosed booth with a big plate glass window over to athletic director Debbie Holt as a courtesy. After checking with both teams' radio announcers and the public address announcer, see if they needed anything, I proceeded to the Dubby's box. I found that Fred, the library crew, and some other Pocatello boosters had beat me there. It was a full house, standing room only, but Dubby didn't seem to mind, even when he had to stand on a stool to see over everybody and watch the first half. ISU led early and was up by 11 at halftime. For the second half, Dubby wanted a better view and asked, this is the athletic director asking, if he could stand in the front row. Fred told Dubby that it would be bad luck for people to change positions, and so Dubby, the athletic director, pushing 70, watched ISU win the Big Sky Championship standing on a stool. ISU started the game like it was going to blow Montana out. The Bengals led 34-23 at halftime, with Mr. Clutch scoring 12 of his 16 points. But everybody knew the Grizzlies playing at home weren't going to roll over, and sure enough, Montana opened the second half with a 14-4 run, and after 5 minutes, ISU led by 1 point, 38-37. Cue the freshman. It wasn't that Steve scored a game-high 19 points and grabbed 13 rebounds. It was when he scored those points and against whom, note the correct use of the word whom, against whom he scored them. 14 of his points were in the second half. 10 were in the game's last 6 minutes, when the Grizz were trying to mount a desperate comeback in front of the Big Sky's loudest home crowd. Remember all those nice things I said about Montana center Ken McKenzie? Unanimous first team, etc., etc. He was the one trying to guard Steve Hayes, but the lanky Aberdeen native made 9 of 13 shots to lead ISU to the championship. The win earned ISU a berth in the NC2A basketball tournament, with the first round in the facility then known as the ASISU Mini Dome. Another tough turnaround, a brutal Monday flight, a Tuesday playoff game in Missoula, a Wednesday return flight to Pocatello, in which no cookies were tossed, and Pocatello greeted ISU at the airport with 1,000 fans. Then the NC2A tournament in Pocatello Saturday. ISU drew WAC champion New Mexico as its opponent. In front of 9,400 spectators, the Bengals battled the Lobos tough, but lost 73-65. Despite the loss, ISU boosters took solace in knowing they had 3 more years of Steve Hayes. And the next to last game in Hayes' career was the most important basketball game and win in ISU history, when the Big Sky fell on UCLA.